The NES was more than just a gaming system. It was a time machine that transported me to a world of fantasy, adventure, and unforgettable memories. And while I've played plenty of games over the years, these 10 NES classics aren't just games, but the building blocks of my childhood. They shaped who I am as a gamer, a creator, and in some ways, even a person. Today, I'm diving into the top 10 NES games that define my childhood. So grab your controller, and let's take a trip down memory lane. In a lot of ways, I feel like Contra is the first game I ever played. I know it wasn't, but my gamer brain thinks of that as the big one, a foundational game in my history. Even if I saw it in the arcades, I imagine my first real experience with Contra was at home. There's something so unique about the game, starting with that first sprint forward to the exploding bridge. Every time I'd feel that tinge of disappointment if I couldn't make it across without falling into the water below. It felt like the world was literally shifting underneath you, and that sense of urgency stuck with me. I didn't get a chance to play it cooperatively a lot. Unfortunately, growing up, I didn't have a lot of super close friends until I was about 7 or 8. I think Contra was probably in the rearview mirror by then. My dad, who was more of a computer guy, didn't really play games with me all too often until I grew up a little bit more. Despite that, there was something magical about tackling a challenge like Contra solo. What I loved most was how the game kept you on your toes. There was a huge variety of stages, jumping from side-scrolling to inner base levels to the iconic vertical waterfall level. It all kept things fresh and thrilling. I guess in some ways, the first 3 levels are the ones that really resonate with me. I could take or leave the second base level, the snow level, or the industrial zone. But the alien lair level, that one always stood out. And of course, I didn't beat the game without the Konami code. But it didn't feel like cheating. It felt like I was handed the key to overcome the impossible odds stacked against me. To this day, I can't think of Contra without thinking of that code. From the opening notes of The Legend of Zelda, I could tell I was in for something special. Koji Kondo's iconic score pulled me right into Hyrule before I even picked up my first sword. The soundtrack alone was so immersive. There was also something uniquely personal about being able to name your save file, making it feel like you were part of the adventure, not just an observer. The game was so open-ended, with its sprawling world and deep lore. It ignited a passion for fantasy in me, one that I still carry today. It's one of the foundational reasons I became a writer. It also became a shared experience between me and my wife, who, like me, fell in love with this world. We loved it so much that we even named our first dog Zelda. One of my standout memories was battling Aquamentus for the first time. Slaying a dragon, as a kid, that was huge. Even at the time, I had no idea how much more awaited me in my adventures as Link. It's funny. Zelda was one of the games that marked the beginning of my love for fantasy storytelling, and it's clear that it's also one of the reasons I dove headfirst into world building later on. When I think about Punch-Out, it's not just about the punches and the chaos. It's about strategy, pattern recognition, and that sweet moment when you finally learn to dodge Piston Honda's flurry or land the perfect blow on King Hippo. That's what made Punch-Out so rewarding, especially as a kid. I was still pretty young at the time, and learning to spot patterns in my opponent's attacks felt like a huge accomplishment. The fight with Bald Bull was especially memorable. I remember thinking he was the ultimate face of the game, even though Mike Tyson, or Mr. Dream depending on the version, was technically the final boss. Bald Bull had this level of character that made him unforgettable. He wasn't just the typical stereotype that many of the other characters leaned into. Great Tiger was another one I'll never forget. There was something mystical about his fight that always made me feel like I was part of something special. Plus, there's a bit of nostalgia tied to him, because he reminds me of my dad, who we lost almost 2 decades ago now. Those little personal connections are what makes these memories last. Super Mario Bros. 2 was, for me, the first time that really made me feel like characters could have their own distinct personalities. It was a game where everyone had unique abilities, and that made me appreciate how everyone brings something different to the table, in games and in life. I think it was Super Mario Bros. 2 that made me realize that everyone has their own talents and stories. I absolutely grew to love all the characters. Even Luigi, who's often overshadowed by Mario, quickly became my favorite. He's floaty, a bit slippery, and unlike anyone else. He could jump higher than the rest, and I loved using that to exploit certain sections of the game. It made me feel like Luigi was this underdog hero, and I've always been drawn to those kind of characters. I didn't learn until later that this game was based on a different title from Japan, and while that fact might have been interesting, I just adored the quirks that made Super Mario Bros. 2 stand out. Sure, Super Mario Bros. 3 was the technically superior game, but there was something undeniably charming about the second one that made it feel unforgettable. I didn't own BurgerTime, but my aunt did, and I remember playing it for hours. I never had a strong connection to the arcade version, but it was at her house that I developed a weird love for it. The concept alone, running around avoiding food-based enemies and building sandwiches, felt like something from a fever dream, and yet it was pure joy. It's quirky, and that's probably why I've always had a soft spot for the whimsical side of gaming. BurgerTime didn't take itself seriously, and I think that opened my mind to the fact that games didn't always need to be serious to be fun. It's that lightheartedness that I've often brought into my own writing, where humor and whimsy are as important as the heart of the story. I didn't own Dragon Warrior myself, but a kid in my neighborhood did. We struck up a deal where we'd trade games for a while, and I felt like I had stolen a dragon's treasure when he didn't want to trade it back. Dragon Warrior was my first real RPG experience on consoles, and it was a huge step away from the fast-paced action games I was used to. It introduced me to the concept of grinding and managing resources, like health and mana. This was another powerful experience with a fantasy world, one where I could explore, level up, and take on massive bosses. I'll never forget slaying my first dragon and rescuing the princess. As simple as that moment might seem in hindsight, it was a big deal to me at the time, and I have to admit, I almost see it in 3D in my mind. That was an era when the most immersive adventures didn't require fancy graphics, just great storytelling and world building. Tetris is one of those games that sticks with you for life, no matter how many iterations or platforms it's released on. I didn't own the original, but my babysitter did, and we spent hours competing to see how far we could get before the screen became a chaotic mess of falling blocks. What's remarkable about Tetris is how peaceful it can be in its early stages, and how quickly it escalates into something frantic. It's a game about managing stress, staying calm, and finding patterns. It taught me how to think ahead, and oddly, it taught me how to focus on the bigger picture, rather than getting bogged down by the details. I don't know if many people remember this, but there was a fantastic version of Tetris on the DS that mixed in all sorts of childhood classics, and that kept the Tetris experience alive for me in a new way. DuckTales stands out because it had a mechanic that was so peculiar and unique, Scrooge McDuck's pogo cane. It wasn't just an attack, it was also the way you traverse the game world in some cases. That added an entirely new dimension to the gameplay, and it made it feel special in a way few other games could match. While finding little chests of diamonds wasn't my favorite part, it was very much in line with who Scrooge McDuck was, an old penny pincher obsessed with hoarding wealth. I didn't really care about the high score, but I loved the exploration. The variety of the levels, from the jungle and the Amazon to the intense African mines, was a major draw. I was a huge fan of movies like The Goonies and Temple of Doom, and DuckTales perfectly captured that spirit. And while the little chests didn't really do a lot for me, finding one of the big treasures was an awesome feeling, and I think it's one of the things that contributed to me being drawn to the other big treasure hunter characters, like Indiana Jones, Locke Cole, and Nathan Drake. Even one of my leads in my book series is a treasure hunter at heart. By the time Mega Man 3 came around, the series had established a solid formula, but this was the game that really gave it heart. The introduction of Proto Man added a level of depth to the world that made it feel more lived in. And even though some of the Robot Masters were a little underwhelming, there were others, like Gemini Man, that really elevated the experience. Though Keiji Inafune felt like the game was rushed, I still feel a sense of satisfaction when I play through it. It had new mechanics, new characters, and a fun return of some old ones. One of my fondest memories of Mega Man 3 is the cheat that I discovered. Holding right on a second controller gave you an extra high jump. It felt like bending the game to your will, like breaking the rules but still coming out on top. It made me realize that sometimes, breaking things can make them better. By the way, if you want to ramp up that cheat even more, jump into a pit and let your life drain to nothing. You're in for a treat if you haven't tried that before. There's a reason Super Mario Bros. Is so universally beloved. It's the gold standard for teaching game design. From the moment you begin, the game guides you through its mechanics, teaching you how to play before you even realize it. That careful planning is why the game still feels fresh today. The sheer scale of the game, with its 32 levels, was unprecedented at the time. It felt like an adventure that could go on forever. The game was full of secrets, some intentionally placed, others more accidental. Those secrets made the world feel alive and worth exploring. And I'll always remember a commercial in the 90s that mentioned a contest where the winner would be put into a Nintendo game. Was that real or did I just imagine it? Either way, the idea of being part of a game was mind-blowing. And there you have it, folks. The 10 NES games that shaped my childhood and continue to live in my memories. Whether it was the challenge, the characters, or the pure joy of exploring new worlds, these games defined what it meant to be a gamer in the 80s and early 90s. It's hard to overstate the impact these titles had on me, and I bet many of you have your own favorite memories tied to these classics. But before we wrap up, I want to hear from you. What are some of your most nostalgic NES games? Which ones didn't make the list, but still hold a special place in your heart? Drop a comment below, and let's reminisce together. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll be back next week with more retro goodness, so don't miss it. And hey, if you're a fan of other nostalgic games, be sure to check out my other videos for even more retro content. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep those game cartridges dusted off and ready for the next adventure. See you next time. Check out our review for Arcade Paradise. It's a very fun, retro-heavy game. If you're into D&D, you can also check out our sister channel, Tellist, where we have plenty of maps on display. And we'll also be refreshing this channel with new retro reviews, so keep an eye out.